Okay, right, let's get this show on the road. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to our first keynote of Loyalty Connect 2025. We are kicking things off today by investigating why being a loyalty laggard is more dangerous than ever before. Research that we at LoyaltyLine did back at the end of last year actually showed that 65% of Shopify brands already have a loyalty program in place. Of the reminder that don't yet have a program live, 43% are working on developing one and 48% are considering starting the process within the next 12 months. If you are not in any of these categories today, you do risk falling behind. But what we want to know is what's prompting this increase in loyalty investment. We're going to unveil some brand new consumer research telling us exactly what consumers think about loyalty programs on Thursday. But before we get to that, we wanted to really dig into things from a retailer's perspective as well. I can think of nobody better to help us do that than our first keynote speaker. So please join me in welcoming Natalie Berg to the stage. Natalie is a retail analyst and founder of the Retail Disrupted podcast. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us today. Perhaps we can start by finding out a little bit more about you. Tell us about yourself and your journey in retail.
Sure, Fee. Well, firstly, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to share my views on retail and loyalty as well. So I have been a retail analyst, observer, commentator for the past 20 years. Grew up in the US, but I've lived in the UK for half my life. So I very much have a global view on retail, retail trends, the future of retail. You know, it's such a fast moving, dynamic industry. I set up my own business about 8 years ago. Previously, I was at sort of the big research firms like Kantar and was Planet Retail. But I've been on my own as an independent analyst for the past 8 years, where I work with a number of different companies, from technology vendors to retailers themselves to consultancies, helping them to navigate all of this disruption. I've written a couple of books about retail, one on Amazon, one on Walmart. And as you said, I also have a podcast, a weekly podcast called Retail Disrupted, where I speak to retail leaders and brands that are really kind of driving the disruption that we're seeing in the market.
Amazing. As I say, I can't think of a better person to have this conversation with. I think you may be my new idol. I definitely cannot wait to read those books as well. So we'll get started. One of my favorite discussions at the moment. Do you think consumers are more loyal today than they used to be, and perhaps less skeptical about joining loyalty programs as well? And if so, what do you think might be driving that change?
Well, it's such a good question. And look, we've been talking about shopper promiscuity for a very long time. And I think today, you know, we've seen such a proliferation of choice. And also in the current climate where getting value is really top of mind for consumers. So they are shopping around, they are being a little bit more cautious when it comes to parting with their hard-earned cash. And I think what's really interesting is if we look at grocery just for a sector, and I know there'll be a lot of people listening in who are in the non-food space, but I think grocery is really interesting because A, it's habitual, right? We tend to buy the same things week in and week out, and B, it's something that we have to do, right? It's something that we're doing on a regular basis. So I think when you look at grocery, there's so much choice today. We have, you know, the discounters, we have the quick commerce players, the Deliveroos, the Uber Eats. E-commerce generally has become so much more accessible with the rise of these direct-to-consumer subscriptions and memberships. And I guess the equivalent or similar on the non-food space is the kind of rise of marketplaces, which is really the evolution of sort of traditional e-commerce. So the point is there's a lot of choice. We've also had a huge change in our lifestyles where we're leading much more hybrid lives. Much more of our lives are digital, of course, post-pandemic, but it means that we're not doing that big weekly shop like we used to do. And at the same time, most of the supermarkets are now doing member pricing. And although that's positioned as a perk for loyalty card holders, I'm going to be controversial here, and I would argue that it's actually encouraging us to be a little bit less loyal because it's essentially two-tiered pricing. So it's a no-brainer to swipe that card, and you're probably going to have, you know, cards or apps for most of the supermarkets in that space. In fact, the average shopper has about 5 loyalty cards in their wallets or in their phones. And just recently, I was at an event and I heard Archie Norman, who's the chairman of Marks and Spencer, I heard him say that actually they should be called disloyalty cards. And by that, I mean the traditional ones, the ones that don't offer really meaningful value. So to answer your question, I think as loyalty has become more digitized, it becomes less of a case of, the physical constraints of a wallet and choosing which brands we want to be loyal to. And it's more to do with, what is the value exchange, right? What am I going to get for giving away my personal data? Is it going to be relevant? Is it going to be valuable to me as a customer? And I think that there is a perception, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of retailers that are doing loyalty really well, but there are some that aren't. And there's this perception that those traditional cards aren't offering genuine value. They aren't differentiating. And I guess just a couple more points, and I'm sorry, this is quite a long answer, but just a couple more points. I think when we think about how digital the world is today, as shoppers, we are hyper informed. We're empowered. We've got everything at our fingertips with customer reviews, pricing information, product information. It's easy to switch retailers and brands when you have access to so much information. So that in theory could make us less loyal. Retailers have to work harder to earn our loyalty. And I know we'll probably talk about this later, but I think AI is really only going to exacerbate that trend. We can already ask ChatGPT just about anything and get an answer instantly. And in the future, we'll be sending off our AI agents to do our shopping for us. So I think, what does all of this mean for customer loyalty when suddenly there's a new gatekeeper to the shopper? So sorry, I've thrown so much at you in my first answer, but I think there's so much going on, and it's just really hard for retailers to encourage shoppers to be loyal.
100%. And you actually hit on another of my favorite things to complain about in the world is the grocery programs, because it is just a price game, really. And traditionally you chose your grocery store based on convenience, where it was. You probably go to the closest one, and if that wasn't the cheapest, you might travel slightly further, but it was very based on those decisions. Obviously now, online, that convenience is everywhere. It's a very different decision. But I think for me, there's two quite interesting things at play that are maybe helping us make choices outside of that convenience. And I think one is that Gen Zs particularly are very focused on shopping with brands that share their values. They really want to shop with brands who care about the same causes. Or, to be honest, this huge growth trajectory of Shopify has resulted in a lot of brands that are built around problems people have or experiences people have. So, for example, we have one customer who has built a whole diet plan and healthcare around his own cancer diagnosis and how he tried to stay healthy during that journey. So I think people now have an opportunity to identify brands that have either come from founders that have similar experiences or share the values that they share. And I think that's a lovely way. It's a lovely journey brands can go on to actually say, well, loyalty used to be about, it used to be a little bit of a friction between convenience, ease, and do I actually love that brand, or do I love the fact that it's down the road? And now you can choose brands that really mean something to you or that you resonate with. And I think that's really lovely. I also think it's really interesting to see the journey around kind of fast fashion and more considered buying journeys. It's not that you're not going to buy from the fast fashion brands, but you want to see that they're making the same choices that you are about their processes. And you might be more loyal to someone who is very actively considering sustainability if sustainability is something that you yourself also care about.
Exactly. And so, something I always say, and I'll probably say it several times during this conversation, but I think the key to driving loyalty is understanding what your customers value. And you've just hit it on the head. Some customers are going to value sustainability. Some are just going to want value. Some are going to want convenience. And so I think it's really key that you understand what it is that your customers want and then create a loyalty program based around them.
100%. And we'll come back to this over and over again in the next 3 days. But I think you hit the nail on the head with the value exchange. It is, well, I'm jumping ahead, so we'll come back to it. But it is so much more than just discounts at this point. But we'll come back to that. First, it would be remiss of us not to talk a little bit about tariffs in this session. I think economic uncertainty and dips in consumer confidence have such a real impact on retailers. We've seen it so much in recent years. We've had pandemics, interest rate hikes, inflation, and now, of course, tariffs. What I'd love to know is, how do you think consumer behavior towards brands and retailers changes when their confidence dips? Do you think this could impact their propensity to be loyal?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, uncertainty makes everyone more cautious. It makes businesses hold back on investments, shoppers hold back on making purchases, or they shop around or trade down to cheaper brands. This is all very predictable behavior that we saw with the pandemic and, previous recessions. So, yeah, generally speaking, I'd say yes, we all become a little bit less loyal during periods of volatility, of disruption. I mean, it's really as simple as sort of your Maslow hierarchy of needs. If your disposable income is being squeezed and, you have to change your behavior, you have to make different and sometimes difficult choices. And I'm not just talking about sort of, lower income shoppers who are having to trade down or to cut back on their spending. But even if you look at the upper end of the market, I recently spoke to the now former CEO of Jigsaw, a big British fashion brand. And he talked about the impact of, this is a very British example, but private school fees have gone up because the whole VAT issue. And he said that's actually really impacted his customers and their propensity to spend. So it's really just about, really, again, going back to understanding your customer and being able to serve them. Now, the tariffs piece is, it's dominating the headlines. And I think when it comes to how consumers are reacting, I don't think consumers aren't quite at distressed levels yet, but certainly we're seeing consumers change their behavior. We've seen some in the US, especially, we've seen some consumers pulling their spending forward ahead of any impending tariffs. Generally just being a little bit more cautious. And again, I think that the challenge is really the narrative. It's the uncertainty that the fear of prices going up, the perception that is really making us change our behavior. And of course, the big question is, who is going to absorb the tariffs or eat the tariffs, I think, as Trump said recently. There's the expectation that retailers and suppliers will figure it out. They'll find a way to absorb the cost. But yeah. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, especially when you consider that we've had a turbulent few years in retail globally. Since the pandemic, it's just been one thing after another. And so we're seeing retailers actually becoming more vocal and suppliers. So Walmart, Mattel in the US are two great examples. Other retailers are reconsidering how they source products and kind of scrambling to change their assortment so they can protect the bottom line. But I think it's inevitable that shoppers are going to pay more. And I think when it comes back to loyalty, it's really about how they communicate those price increases to shoppers, because transparency is key. We've seen Canadian retailers, and they can, arguably be a little bit more assertive here, but we've seen them communicate the tariff price and be really clear, like, our prices are going up because of tariffs. So I think that's super important if you want to maintain trust with the shopper and keep them loyal. And also, I think just one last point is around the temptation to alter your loyalty program during these periods of volatility. So here in the UK, we saw Boots, the big pharmacy drugstore chain, we saw them do this a few years ago, which was part of a bigger overhaul, but they reduced the number of points that shoppers earn per purchase. And there was a big backlash. I mean, it was part of a bigger kind of overhaul, but I would argue that you probably want to be more generous and maybe even increase the points that your shoppers get to sort of offset the higher prices that you inevitably are going to have to charge, or find ways, to really focus on your top customers and offer more favorable terms to compensate for those higher prices at the shelf. And really, again, just really thinking about your top customers here, your most loyal customers, and long-term customer value is really key here.
I couldn't agree more. We actually have done some research from our loyalty line data. We've compared a period of low consumer confidence around about that, the inflation, interest rate hikes, etc., with a period of sort of normal high confidence. And we found that the propensity to repeat purchase from non-members does kind of drop. You're not as likely to see those repeat purchases, but loyalty program members, they will remain shopping with you. The repeat purchase from loyalty program members is still there, even when consumer confidence dips. So I think you're 100% right. Focusing on those customers and making sure that they continue to come back is priority number one. I also, you're exactly right. Giving that, it comes back to that value exchange again. A greater value exchange means that you offset those higher prices. And the beauty of loyalty programs now is not all of your rewards have to be financially costly to you. You know, yes, you want to be offering 10% off, you want to be offering free shipping, etc. But what about things like exclusive content or early access to sales or early access to new products? You know, we even see for top loyalty program tiers things like invitations to feedback on products, things like that. You know, they make customers feel special, but they don't really cost you very much outside of your marketing strategy already to deliver. So, but you're giving them that love, you know, you're giving them more value, which they'll continue to pay for, hopefully.
Yeah, and fostering that kind of sense of community as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think trust, value, communication, they've got to be the three things. And it's so much easier to deliver on that to a loyal community. So
yeah. Not all customers are created equal, right?
Yeah. I remember the Boots example well. It was an interesting set of headlines around that one.
Yeah, I mean, they did, and I think this is why it's nuanced, right? Because, and again, not to pick on one retailer, but I mean, I had mixed feelings about this overhaul because they're also tapping into the fact that shoppers today want instant value. They want that instant gratification. So they were I think they now offer, 10% off their own brand products. So I thought that aspect was really interesting, and also we have to be realistic. Retailers are facing all of these cost headwinds, tariffs aren't helping. And so it's not, I mean, as much as we'd love to be generous with our, giving away rewards, you really have to focus on those top customers and make some difficult decisions. So.
Yeah, 100%. Fantastic. Thank you. Now, we've already kind of alluded to this, but one thing we do know is shifting is discounts. Traditionally, consumers were all about discounts, but today they're looking for loyalty programs that are tied to rewards and experiences as well. And I wonder, why do you think this is? Why do you think what consumers are looking for in a value exchange has changed today?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it goes back to understanding what your customers value. And for some people, yes, as we've said, it is still about low prices, value for money. And that's why we've seen retailers like Asda offering cashback, right, with their loyalty program. We've seen Lidl, the hard discounter, offer, they've got an app. It's all about gamification, which is what I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But, they do those scratch cards, which is, again, about, just knowing that your customers are looking for low value. You cater to that. For beauty, it might be a birthday discount to go and treat yourself and kind of tap into the self-care angle, or, access, you talked about early access to sales or access to classes and tutorials. For Amazon, I've spent a lot of time studying Amazon. Prime members, they want convenience, they want ease. So Amazon, I mean, we could spend hours talking about Amazon Prime, but it's the delivery perks of Amazon Prime, but there's also a whole host of other very sticky benefits like Prime Music, Prime Video. They've got a partnership with Deliveroo here in the UK, discounts on cinema tickets, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it brings up an interesting point because yes, you need to offer beyond discounts, you need to offer the thing that your customers want. In Amazon's case, it's that free, fast and free delivery. But there also has to be this surprise and delight element. So one of my favorite quotes from Jeff Bezos was, he was talking about Amazon Prime. And he said, look, the goal here, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said the goal is to offer customers so much value with Prime to make it so compelling that it would be irresponsible That was his word. Irresponsible not to join. And I love that. I just think that's, that just sums up what they're about. So yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it's about catering to your shoppers. I was at World Retail Congress recently, and I heard from Albert Heijn, which is a big Dutch grocer, and they made an interesting point about Gen Z shoppers, saying that Gen Z shoppers are loyal to trends, but they're not loyal to brands. And again, this is a massive generalization, but he said it's kind of the opposite to older shoppers who are loyal to brands, but maybe not loyal to trends. And I just thought that was an interesting way to put it. And again, we can't put customers into neat little boxes. We know better now than to do that. But he also made the point that Gen Z shoppers were coming into stores more than any other generation. So it's complicated, right? They might not want to be rewarded for buying more stuff, but maybe they want recipe inspiration. Maybe they want more experiences, and that's how you reward them. So again, it goes back to your earlier point of understanding that, customers want to shop with brands whose values reflect their own, and they want to be rewarded for their loyalty based on their needs.
Yeah. And I think this is actually providing a really great opportunity for smaller brands, because let's face it, the average retailer isn't going to be able to compete with Amazon Prime on delivery times, on range of products, and on all the extra bits that you've just described that make it, as you say, super sticky. It takes a lot and it costs a lot to match that supply chain and all the processes, but then also to match their pricing is really challenging. So if you can find other ways, other values, other things that you can add, then you have a way of differentiating against Amazon and hopefully winning back some of that market share. And I think super interesting what you said about Gen Z and trends. I mean, it blows my mind every time I walk past a store and there is a queue of people round the block queuing, and me and my other half often talk about this, and we laugh on holiday because we're like, what are you waiting for? Is there a celebrity there, or are you literally just waiting to go into this shop? Because would you not just come back and try again later? It's incredible. Yeah. And I don't know if you'd call that loyalty or not, and I don't know if they're being loyal to the brand or to the trend, but there is, you're 100% right that people will queue for hours to get into a store to buy from that brand. And you don't get that feeling on Amazon.
No, you don't. And I think to go back to your first point, one of the key findings of the book that I co-authored with my former colleague Maya Knights, one of the key findings, we were trying to put our heads together and say, okay, well, how can brands compete with Amazon? And we came up with the acronym WACD, which is what Amazon can't do. And it's all the things that you just described, and they're trying to kind of tap into some of those things now. But ultimately, I think in retail today, you can't be everything to everyone. Amazon's probably the one retailer that can get away with sort of being that because of the convenience and the ease. But generally speaking, I think you need to really understand what your strengths are, what makes you special, how do you differentiate from your rivals, who are your core customers. That's really the first step to kind of not even surviving, but really kind of thriving in this era of disruption. And so that's what I always say to retailers when I'm, giving talks. It's, really understand the very first thing. And it sounds really obvious. It sounds like we should all know, what makes us special as retailers, but it's important. And especially for a lot of the, the smaller and independent brands, I think it's probably easier to have that clarity than the big guys.
Yeah, and could make things a lot easier for some of the dropshipping brands out there as well. People who are, you might be selling other people's products, but that doesn't mean that you haven't got a great reason for why you're doing that, or a great theme that's running through your products, etc. Fun exercise to try and figure out what that is, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
WACD. I like that. I will be using it. Fantastic. So you mentioned gamification. Obviously, that's one thing we see a lot of in retail. We've got spin to wins on websites all the way through to more kind of formalized VIP tiers in loyalty programs. But, I mean, I completely understand that gamification works, because I'm as bad as anyone for sitting there trying to get to the next level on a game on my phone or something. But why does gamification work so well for today's customers? What is it in our psyche that responds so well to it? And do you think it can have a positive impact on loyalty as well?
Yeah, I mean, this one is super interesting. And I think it's part of a bigger trend that we're seeing where traditionally, and I would argue still pretty much today, e-commerce has been pretty transactional. We just talked a lot about Amazon. You don't browse. I don't mean to pick on Amazon, but you don't browse on Amazon, right? You don't sit down and think, oh, I'm just going to scroll through. You might do that on Instagram or, TikTok, but you don't. E-commerce generally, it's still very one-dimensional. It's still very, you tend to kind of know what you're looking for before you pick up your phone. It's not really, there's not a whole lot of joy in it. It's not shopping, it's purchasing. So I think it's important that we make that distinction because things are evolving. And I think what I'm really excited about is how e-commerce is going to become so much more multi-dimensional, so much more immersive, personalized. That is really the direction to travel. And I think when you take a step back and you think about sort of the evolution of retail, the past 10 years has been really all about making our physical spaces more digitized. And again, COVID was a huge catalyst for that with, frictionless checkout and digital signage. And, we're now seeing retail media exploding online and in store, but it's really been about digitizing our physical spaces. The next 10 years, in my view, is going to be about how we make our digital spaces much more physical, much more lifelike, much more immersive. So that is kind of the bigger picture. And I think when we drill down, and I guess before we drill down, I would just clarify that when I talk about digital spaces becoming more immersive, I don't mean the metaverse, first of all, because 3 years ago, if you went to a retail event, that's all we talked about. Whereas now, it's all about AI, although I think there's a big distinction between both of those different technologies. But so no, I'm a little bit of a metaverse skeptic, but I think what we are seeing is social commerce. I just said, social, we're happy to pick up our phones and browse on Instagram or TikTok. So social commerce bridges that gap because you're marrying up the convenience of shopping online with the discovery aspect that you get from being in a physical store. I think that's like such a low-hanging fruit, and we're finally starting to see real traction there. But it's also things like augmented reality, virtual try-ons, live shopping, again, tied to social commerce, virtual shopping consultations, even things like 3D images and video, and AI, again, is making all of this a lot quicker. Gen AI chatbots, AI-powered styling and product recommendations, all of these things are making our e-commerce experiences more immersive and more enjoyable. So I think, sorry, it's taken me a long time to get to gamification. Again, it's another big topic. But I think that, gamification does play a role here. And we've got a whole new generation of shoppers. I mean, I look at how my kids who are 9 and 12, I look at how they spend their time, how they socialize, and, in the next few years, how they're going to be shopping as Gen Alphas. And it's totally different. They're expecting a far more immersive digital experience. And I think the brands that are catering to this really well, you look at TikTok, Temu, Shein, this is how you would build a brand today. It's app-based, it's hyper-personalization, creates that sense of urgency and gamification. And it's that same kind of dopamine hit you get from Black Friday, but it's sort of in your pocket all the time. So, I mean, there's a whole other, how great this is for our mental health is a whole other topic. But I think gamification is there. And just quickly to your point about, spin to win, I think that's really interesting. And even if you offer points instead of an actual discount within those games, the customer still feels like they're getting something. So there's still that value exchange there. But interestingly, the points will encourage future purchases. So it's a win-win really for retailers. Big topic. Loads of retailers doing great things, Nike, Starbucks, but I'll stop there because I'm conscious it's a long answer.
I think it's really interesting the difference between a one-off dopamine hit of like the spin to win or something like that versus the kind of longer term emotional good feeling over and over again is something I think retailers could definitely consider, a discount or a spin to win or that kind of one-off, I feel great right now versus actually if I shop with this brand, I'm going to feel good over and over and over again. And I think that is, if people can achieve that, then fantastic. I think it was really interesting during the pandemic watching people have to move their offline operations online. And I think that was kind of the beginning of some brands who'd never really considered doing anything immersive before, suddenly thinking, okay, we need to do this. And we had a few brands actually, Astrid and Miu being the one that comes to mind, but they there was also Lively, who are an underwear brand. They would do fittings, bra fittings on in store, and they couldn't do that anymore. So they then started doing virtual consultations. So you could, meet the fitter online. They'd help you measure, they'd help you find the right product, etc. I don't think they'd ever have done that if they hadn't been forced, or maybe they would be a long way down the road. And I think it was a very interesting time for watching people figure out, actually, yeah, it works. If we can do this immersive and fully involved experience across all of our channels, that's going to be better for everyone.
Definitely. It's that whole, necessity being the mother of invention, right? That we saw a lot of experimentation. A lot of retailers have to turn on their online operations overnight. And especially, for those smaller or independent brands, I think they were actually more agile, and they were able to, that had different challenges, but also, they know their customers, arguably know their customers better, and able to make those changes more quickly. And the virtual shopping consultation is interesting. It hasn't exploded in the way that, because we do like stores. I think that's one thing the pandemic taught us. That was the first thing we could do when we were able to, is get back in stores. Our expectations have changed, but we do like, the touch and feel that you can't really get from a screen. But I think, the world is a lot more hybrid now. And, here in the UK, we saw John Lewis, we saw Currys as well, an electronics retailer, offer those virtual shopping consultations. And it kind of goes back to the whole, a trend that I've been sort of observing over the past 5 to 10 years, I'd say, which is the democratization of white glove service. So again, like making your shoppers, especially, your most loyal shoppers, making them feel like real VIPs, offering them those kinds of services and experiences. And again, tech is enabling this, things that we thought were science fiction a few years ago, drones, checkout free stores. 10-minute grocery delivery, all these things are like, no, that's hype. That's not reality. And sometimes, what we see is it might not be sustainable in its current form, these technologies and innovations, but they lead to something else that is sustainable. And I think that's what I find so interesting, is just, how quickly things are moving, and how, tech can really enhance the customer experience.
100%. And it does always come back to that customer experience. It's interesting. I've actually just been in France for a week, and we were talking about how the shopping experience is quite different. You walk into a shop and you are greeted, and somebody says, "Can I help you? What are you looking for?" And, you walk into a shop here, people do say hello, of course, and they might say, "How can I help?" But there's not the same, "What are you looking for? Do you know what you want?" It was far more consultative. And actually, we talk a lot about the difference between going into maybe a fashion store and going into a cycling store, for example. Things like cycling or music stores, anything where somebody is selling something that they are passionate about, or that relates to an activity or a hobby that they are passionate about. They know so much about their product, and they really actively consult with you. And we often talk about how, imagine if you got that in every store that you went into. And I think it's interesting, because more AI, more tech, etc., that will help you do that. Whatever you're selling, you could be selling oranges in the supermarket, and you could be providing that insight into what should you do with your oranges, where should you store your oranges, what could you make with your oranges. I think tech could really help translate that passion more across a wider range of verticals and stores.
Definitely. And we are seeing that now, with retailers equipping their staff with those digital tools to really elevate the customer experience, offer that hyper personalization, more expertise, more that tech-enabled human touch is what I talk about a lot. And I think that is really the thing that in retail really differentiates those retailers that are winning and those that are losing. So marrying up technology with that human touch, human experience. But yeah, it is interesting. And I guess it kind of raises another point around personalization and customer needs being very individualized. So not everybody wants to be asked how they are when they walk into a store. Funnily enough, I was in France last week as well, and I noticed the same thing. And I had to kind of remember, how do you say I'm browsing? Je cherche. I think that might be wrong. So it's a totally different experience, but not everybody wants that. And I think there's a great example. I'm not sure if it's Sephora, but it is definitely a beauty retailer, where it's an image that was kind of going viral a while ago, where when you walked in, you could see there were two two baskets that you can choose from, and they were color coded. So one is like, I want help, and the other one is leave me alone, I just want to shop. So again, really understanding your customer and what they need is so important.
100%, because also for the same customer, I can differ on 2 different days. There's one day where I want your help, and there's another day when I just want to be left alone. And there's no consistency. There's no way of predicting it for myself. So goodness knows how is a brand supposed to predict that?
Yeah.
But that is actually one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, personalization. It's a big buzzword, but to be honest, it's been buzzing for years at this point. I think personalization, when I first started working in marketing, it was dear first name in an email. Obviously we still do that, but it's not going to cut it really anymore. So I'd love to know, why do you think personalization is so important to today's customers, and why does good personalization make customers so loyal?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right. Personalization isn't just inserting a name in an email, and people will see right through that, right? So I think in many ways, retail is going full circle. So back to, like what we just talked about, walking into a shop and having the store associate greet you by name. Technology is enabling this, and that kind of personalization at scale is the holy grail for retailers. Mm-hmm. But I think it's so important. I mean, in summary, it's so important because retail is a very crowded place today, as we talked about, a little bit earlier. It's very noisy, especially with all the choice that we have online today. So I think being able to reach your customers, your best customers, in a very targeted and relevant way is crucial. I just worked on a report for MailChimp. The report is called The New E-commerce Calendar, and it's all about kind of how, when we think about e-commerce events, we think about Black Friday or we think about Prime Day. But actually, there are so many different moments and occasions to communicate and to kind of tailor experiences and activations to your audience. So, Black Business Week, Autism Awareness Month, there's all kinds of different opportunities now where I think retailers can get closer to their customer, and these aren't price-led events as well. So I think that's really interesting. But another finding from the report was just that around 40% of shoppers that we surveyed feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of sales and deals available. Because again, it's very noisy. And we're all, I think, to some extent suffering from promotion fatigue, especially as we move into the second half of the year where we're just inundated with offers and messaging. So again, I think it's about, prioritizing those moments that, as we said earlier, that align with your brand and your customer values, and being able to do that authentically. And so I think, in terms of personalization, we are moving towards hyper personalization, and it's the future is real-time customized offers, dynamic pricing to a certain extent. That gets a little bit controversial, but definitely very personalized, tailored communications. And I think customers today are really expecting a base level of personalization to be baked into every interaction that they have with brands. So yeah, I guess the other thing to point out is again, it has to be authentic. Shoppers will see through it, if it's not. But also that value exchange needs to be really clear. Again, we've kind of touched on this already, but if you look at some of the big disruptors, some of the biggest, most influential brands of the century, Uber, Amazon, Spotify, Netflix, much of their success has been due to a relentless focus on the customer and making that experience both as frictionless and as relevant as possible. And I think that's really important, frictionless and relevant. And, I think that customers understand the only way you're going to get that sort of experience is if you consent to giving away some data. Again, a whole other topic. But just one last very brief point on this. I think Shein is actually a really good example, and not for the reasons that we might think, but the whole kind of real-time on-demand production, which is how they're able to offer such low prices and offer clothing that is what customers want. Because when they produce a batch of clothing, they're only going to look at 150 to 200 items. They're going to put that out into the wild and then see how shoppers react. They're going to look for certain demand signals, even before they go on sale. So, how are shoppers engaging with this brand, this product or this style, either in the app or online? And increasingly shoppers, retailers rather, are looking to AI to kind of spot those trends in advance. So lots to say, but I think on the whole, you can't ignore personalization.
No, absolutely. And I do think you make a very interesting point, though. It's challenging for retailers. You're being expected to personalize far more, but you don't have the same volume of data falling naturally out of your ads campaigns, things like that. The changes, cookie changes, the cookie apocalypse, as we like to call it, all of that is making it really hard for retailers to collect data. But we're not so willing to give our data away either. We've understood that perhaps it is ours and we can protect it, and we don't have to hear from everybody. We can hear from the people we want to. If we've got more protective, the amount of data falling into the laps has decreased. So how can we still expect this level of personalization? And it's interesting, we're seeing some brands do very interesting things with their programs, where actually it's when you join a program, you are invited to complete a profile. And sometimes that's a very niche profile. So it could be a skin profile, a hair profile. Sometimes it's actually a pet profile, tell us about your pet, their birthday, etc. But you complete that profile or quiz in exchange for points, which obviously helps you build up points balance for your next reward. But it gives the retailer all this information that they can then use. But it has to be used sensibly. If you ask me for my birthday, then I want to hear from you on my birthday. If you ask me for my pet's dietary requirements, then I want you to be contacting me about the products that are relevant to that. I think you're 100% right. The relevancy has to come through as well. If I'm going to share this with you, then you need to deliver on a promise that you're going to use it wisely and in a useful way as well.
Yeah, definitely. And even if it is discount based, I think making it a meaningful discount. It's not just the kind of blanket, everybody's getting a 20% off everything this weekend sort of email. And I think, even like if you look at Nike, I just missed my son's birthday. The window to get the discount, it wasn't a discount. It was a £20 voucher that they emailed. And I kind of forgot about it. And I thought that's actually, that's a decent amount of money that they're, willing to take off my overall purchase. Now I know, pricing wise, things are probably more at full price. And, there's ways that they sort of communicate value while protecting their bottom line. But I felt value that I got an email from Nike saying, here's £20 off. And it wasn't, £5 off or, 10%. It felt like that was a sizable reward. So again, it's just about, making customers feel that they're really getting something.
Absolutely. And I think there's really clever ways to tie that to your own marketing and product strategy as well. You mentioned different, not just Black Friday, but maybe different calendar events, days, weeks that are relevant to your brand. If you can launch a new product that ties into that, if you can, pick that moment to launch a new product, but only make it available to your loyalty program members, you have that testing ground that you mentioned again. You have testing ground, but you also give them that feeling of exclusivity. They're getting something.
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. We are fast running out of time. So to round things off, where do you think consumers will take us next when it comes to loyalty and loyalty programs? What should retailers be prepared to see in the next 10 years?
Oh, it's a big question, and I can't really answer it without mentioning AI, because AI is really changing everything about, it's impacting the entire value chain, from, pre-consumption, from, product development and ideation, all the way through to post-consumption and return. So it is impacting everything. It's not going to take over everything, but I think it is going to touch everything. So Clive Humby from dunnhumby, he said a while ago that data is the new oil. And, now here we are in 2025 and AI is just supercharging this. So I think there's a couple of things here, and I will try to be brief. Firstly, I think the integration of new AI tools into loyalty programs, via tech partnerships is really interesting. So as more and more AI tools pop up, I think retailers can help customers to make more informed decisions. So we're already seeing that with things like Gen AI chatbots, which are a whole lot better than the chatbots that exist today. So Gen AI chatbots, product recommendations, condensed summaries of customer reviews. So again, really helping the customer to make an informed decision at the point of purchase. And every day there's new use cases for AI. So I think that as loyalty programs, or loyalty platforms rather, I think as loyalty platforms increasingly integrate with those AI tools, then brands are going to get even more value from AI. So once the customer has made that informed decision, well, retailers can then strongly incentivize conversion. So yeah, I guess like overall, the big picture is that, it's a highly competitive retail landscape. These marginal gains are going to help you to get ahead of the competition. The second thing related to AI is just that, AI is driving better database decisions in loyalty program management. We're going to see brands using AI to make better decisions about how they set up their loyalty programs, but also how they can incentivize repeat purchasing among a specific audience. So that's going to be something to look out for, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years. And then outside of AI, I think just generally, it's important that we distinguish between emotional loyalty and transactional loyalty. And again, something that I said in our book was that, Amazon, can we even call Amazon Prime a loyalty program? That's debatable in itself, but it's clear that it does drive loyalty among shoppers. But what are those shoppers loyal to? Are they loyal to the service, to the convenience and the ease, or are they loyal to Amazon as a brand? Now, I would argue that emotional loyalty exists with brands. I mentioned Nike earlier. It's those brands where we can really have that deep connection, that kind of meaningful, it goes beyond the transaction, right? And I'm sure a lot of the retailers listening in, especially the smaller brands, are in a fortunate position to have that relationship with the customer. So emotional loyalty is, that's the win. That's the kind of holy grail. We talked about not being everything to everyone, really focusing on the 80-20 rule, focusing on your most valuable customers. And again, as we said earlier, continue to surprise and delight them, right? Continue to push the boat out, go beyond, don't lose sight of what your customer values. As we said, that could be convenience, value, sustainability, but don't lose sight of that. Work backwards from your customer to build your loyalty programs. And just finally, I think if you really want to drive loyalty in the future, and today to a certain extent, I think you have to understand what your customer wants before they do. You need to keep innovating because, the market is moving so quickly. I think that the innovations that take place today quickly become tomorrow's norm. So you have to keep experimenting. You've got to keep evolving. And that's how you stay relevant to customers in such a fast-moving world.
Amazing. Thank you. God, exciting, intimidating slightly, but really exciting space to be in at the moment for sure. I will check back in with you in 10 years and we'll see where the world has gone. Hopefully before. Okay, I'm afraid that is all we have time for, which is a huge shame because I could keep talking to Natalie for hours. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspective on retail loyalty, today's consumer. You've given me and our audience a huge amount to think about, and we very much appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Retail Disrupted podcast to hear more from Natalie. I can confirm it is fast becoming one of my favorite morning walk companions, and you can find it on all the usual podcast channels. As I mentioned already, we'll be digging even further into the consumer psyche on day 3 of Loyalty Connect on Thursday. We're going to be sharing our new research on what shoppers want from loyalty programs for the very first time. So do dial back in for that. But don't go anywhere because we are about to start our next session, the Loyalty League. I will be joined by 3 more retail experts who are helping us to understand what we can learn from the biggest players in loyalty, as well as what we can learn from their mistakes. So stay tuned. Thank you again so much, Natalie, and we will see you all again very shortly.